Good afternoon, and welcome to the conversation, No Productive Freedom Without Racial Justice, Intersectional Organizing in Support of the Movement for Black Lives. I'm Kimberly Peeler-Allen, board member of NARAL Pro-Choice America Foundation, and I have spent over 20 years working at the intersection of race, gender, and politics. I'm currently a visiting practitioner at the Center for American Women in Politics at Rutgers University, and am the co-founder of Higher Heights for America, the nation's leading organization focused on Black women's political power. I'm also the board chair of the ERA Coalition, an organization at the forefront of the efforts to get the Equal Rights Amendment codified as the 28th Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. I'm thrilled to be joined this afternoon by three of my sister friends in the intersectional work of justice in America. Atima Omara is an award-winning leader, political strategist, and advocate who has spent 17 years engaging youth, women, and people of color at the intersection of politics, advocacy, and the progressive movement. Since 2017, she has been the president of Omara Strategy Group, a consulting firm that provides strategic political services to political candidates and organizations that center women, people of color in their work to build a more progressive, reflective democracy. She is currently an elected member of the Democratic National Committee and elected vice chair of the DNC's Women's Caucus. Welcome, Atima. Renee Redwood is considered one of the nation's foremost experts on diversity and advocacy for inclusion. For more than 2 decades, Renee has informed the debate on access and equal opportunity while directing initiatives for public, nonprofit, and private sector organizations. Ms. Redwood is currently the CEO of Redwood Enterprises, LLC, a consulting practice that provides data-informed strategies to deliver people and process solutions to support the client's mission. Previously, Ms. Redwood served in the office of Congresswoman Eleanor Holmes Norton, the president of the Glass Ceiling Commission, and the Democratic National Committee. She is currently a member of the NARAL Pro-Choice America board. Jamia Wilson is a feminist activist, writer, and speaker. As director of the Feminist Press at the City University of New York and the former VP of Programs at the Women's Media Center, Jamia has been a leading voice on women's rights issues for over a decade. Her work has appeared in numerous outlets, including the New York Times, The Today Show, CNN, Elle, BBC, Rookie, Refinery 29, Glamour, Teen Vogue, and The Washington Post. She is the author of Young, Gifted, and Black, An Introduction and Oral History, and An Oral History, Together We Rise, Behind the Scenes at the Protests Heard Around the World. And it is the co-author of The Roadmap for Revolutionaries, Resistance, Advocacy, and Activism for All. Welcome all. So before we dig into this conversation today, I wanted to just kind of do some level setting for the viewers and provide a shared language when we talk about reproductive justice, reproductive freedom, and racial justice, just so we have that common floor on which to build. So NARAL defines reproductive freedom as having affordable access to all reproductive health care options, including birth control and abortion care. It also means supporting people who choose to work while pregnant and raising families. Sister Song, a national leader in reproductive justice, defines reproductive justice as a human right. RJ, as it's also called, is based on the United Nations internationally accepted Universal Declaration of Human Rights, a comprehensive body of law that details the rights of individuals and the responsibilities of government to protect those rights. It's not about access, it's about access, not choice. Mainstream movements have focused on keeping abortion legal as an individual choice. That is necessary, but not enough. Even when abortion is legal, many women of color cannot afford it or cannot travel hundreds of miles to the nearest clinic. There is no choice when there is no access. And it's not just about abortion. Abortion access is critical, and women of color and other marginalized women also and often have difficulty accessing contraception, comprehensive sex education, STI prevention and care, alternative birth options, adequate prenatal and pregnancy care, domestic violence assistance, adequate wages to support our families, safe homes, and so much more. And racial justice is defined as the systematic, fair treatment of people of all races, resulting in equitable opportunities and outcomes for all. Racial justice, or racial equity, goes beyond anti-racism. It's not just the absence of discrimination or inequalities, but also the presence of deliberate systems and supports to achieve and sustain racial equality through proactive and preventative measures. So with that framing, let's just dig right into it. And for each of you, and how did you move into this space of reproductive freedom, reproductive justice, racial justice, as you know, throughout your careers? Atima?
So for me, I think I actually started at a time when I think this conversation was really getting into sort of the national landscape outside of the movement. And that was in the early 2000s with the March for Women's Lives. And that originally had started off as, when it was first named, the March for Freedom of Choice. And it was now NARAL, Feminist Majority, and I'm forgetting, I think it was Center for Reproductive Rights that were involved in the four that were involved in kind of announcing this march. And it was in response to the Bush administration's policies on reproductive health at that time. A lot of reproductive justice organizations, primarily led by Black and brown women, Asian women, were like, this framing of it does not represent where we are as a movement in our work and what we see in our communities on a regular basis. And so I was involved in the National Organization for Women at the time as a local chapter member, and it could become a state officer, and then got involved in Virginia in assisting to recruit young people for the march. And it was sort of that reframing around what it actually means, not just the freedom aspect, but the right to be able to access it. That changed the name of that march, and sort of really for me has been that guiding sort of principle in all the work that I've done. Are we having these conversations around all of the people affected by this? For me, Roe should not be considered the ceiling. It should be considered the floor on which everything else that we build. And that is how I have approached my work, whether I was serving on the Planned Parenthood board, affiliate board in my area, when I served on the DC Abortion Fund. Shout out to all abortion funds out there, because they're doing the work of making sure those same people who, yes, for Roe is the law of the land, but because of the Hyde Amendment, because of the way states have set up how Medicaid works and other federally funded insurance, if you're in the military, not being able to access that right, sort of makes it impossible. So that's how I've tried to operate within the repro space. And when I've served on boards, worked at organizations, thinking about that messaging and that work in mind.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Renee, how did you find yourself in this space?
Well, it's wonderful to be here with you all. But Jamia, I was just honored to be here with you. And I'll tell you why. I came to this space back in 1974 as part of a program called Young, Gifted, and Black. I was brought into a prep school who was doing affirmative action at the time. And I was one of two Black, we were not African-American then, we were Black, my people, okay? And I was brought into that and had opportunities to go to the 5 women's colleges, which were also doing affirmative action and outreach. And I got to go into Smith College, and my mentor was Yolanda King. because she was affiliated with the Young, Gifted, and Black initiative as well. And we read the book, Our Bodies, Ourselves. And the biggest problem with the book was I didn't see myself. And so the intersectionality for me came at that point as a senior in high school to understand the linkage between my color, my race, my Blackness, and my gender, woman. And so I came to the reproductive justice rubric before I even knew what reproductive freedom was. And justice, as I had defined it at that time, was I needed to see myself in the books that talked about my body, about my sexuality, including the right to a safe and legal abortion. So that is how I came to this movement. And it's just a pleasure to meet you. And Atima, it's great to see you. And Kimberly, it's always good to be with you.
Thank you so much, Renee. Jamia, what was your path?
Thank you so much, Renee. I'm just feeling the love and sending it right back to you. I remember the surreal feeling of, and this kind of speaks to my path, getting to participate in the 40th anniversary of Our Bodies, Ourselves by getting to write a little bit for that book and to do a submission. At that time, it was about activism and media activism and why that was important to reproductive justice work, why it was important to the entire story of feminism and how we live in a healthier world with a healthier media. And being a part of that anthology, having been given a copy of Our Bodies, Ourselves when I was 13 by my mom, who had been a Black feminist, who had also read it when it originally came out, but then also feeling this surreal moment of saying, oh, I'm having an opportunity now to use the skills I gained when I cut my teeth in activism at Planned Parenthood, at the Action Fund, and then later on the C3 side, during campus organizing for the March for Women's Lives that Atima discussed, and also seeing the conversations and rigor around the conversations that were happening then around intersectionality and even sort of a good conflict, a good trouble, like John Lewis would have said, around making sure that the banner of this march would be all encompassing of the issues that were facing people of color and women from various different economic backgrounds, et cetera. And so just doing that book and having the very small role that I played in that, showing me that, oh, your role in this work doesn't necessarily always need to be under the umbrella of a reproductive justice organization per se, or a feminist organization. You can have a role in shaping media and a healthier media discourse and a healthier public conversation as it relates to these issues, and to normalize and center conversations around reproductive justice, reproductive freedom. And so in the work that I did at Planned Parenthood, there were a lot of opportunities there to speak out specifically about how these issues affected us in the public square. At the time, I didn't think it could get much worse than when I started out there, because it was during the Bush administration. But this moment has shown us that it can. And I think that was really good training for me to have early on in my career, to take that in the various different places I've been. But then I had the opportunity to work in different vectors of the media, sometimes within organizations that specifically work on gender justice issues, but then also at places like TED, where I also worked, and to really just think about how we use storytelling as a catalyst for social change. And so now at Feminist Press, it has been a really wonderful experience for me to be at a press that started 50 years ago, really understanding why we need to create a more just world where everyone can recognize themselves in a book. We want not to have a generation like what Renee shared, where we couldn't even see ourselves in the books that are closest to our values, right? But that all of us deserve to be able to see ourselves reflected in all of the discourse and the uniqueness of our experience. And so I just love how you brought that book in as an anchor, because I think now of how that book, which is still a very special book to me, ended up resulting in a Trans Bodies, Trans Selves book that came out of someone in the trans community saying, I I'm an expert in this space. I am a doctor in this space, and I want our voices heard. And just seeing how intersectional movements work, and that we have these personal experiences, and then we use those personal experiences to impact how we are going to make our change in our interventions. So I'm just really happy to be with each of you, because despite the terrain we're going through right now, I feel safer in the world knowing that you all are doing what I know you do every day to make things better for all of us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you each have talked about how, just through your life experience, you've had to help move the needle to make sure that the vision of things is definitely more inclusive and really accepts the intersectionality of our lives. And, in this moment, there's just so much that is going on, and everyone wants to show that they are an ally, whether it is an institution, an individual. Some organizations like NARAL have taken very bold steps by coming on and saying that they fully endorse and support the policy demands of the movement for Black Lives, particularly the Breathe Act that really attacks structural racism in the police force. And that is one really bold step. But from what you've seen, what would you say is another great example of maybe an individual, or what individuals have done, or other institutions? And also, I'm curious as to what have you seen that's a swing and a miss, because there have been a lot of those as well. Renee, what do you think?
I would just like to add one key point here. Part of the Breathe Act is that it's primarily targeted at the police force, and the whole system needs a Breathe Act. I think part of our challenge, and I'm thankful for it, it's a start, it is fundamental, it is critical, but we also have to expand other mechanisms of accountability. And so I think for our members, and I'm proud to be on the board of NARAL and have served on the C4 as the chair of NARAL Pro-Choice, and then now on the C3 board. I'm proud of the fact that we are indeed, as an organization that is seen as primarily a white organization, and demographically it is. And at some point we'll have some opportunity to talk about our intentionality and our progress forward on being more inclusive and diverse in our representation, but we do so through our strategic partnerships and allyship with the Reproductive Justice Organization. And we just on the Breathe Act. Part of this is that we, as individuals who need to be able to breathe for the fullness of our freedom. So much of what's at attack is our self-agency, the ability to decide, the ability to make our own choices, the ability for us to breathe as we need to support ourselves and our family and our community. And so what we can do individually, make sure we reach out to our members to sponsor the Breathe Act, and make sure that it is that there's appropriate appropriations or things that we can do legislatively. And then in the community, we need to talk about it. We need to make sure that this is one of the areas that we have voting on. You can't see my vote pin, but it's important for us to vote. If you're not registered, do so now. If you are registered, check now to make sure you know where you are to be voting. If you can do absentee ballot, do it now. Vote by mail, do it now. You do it now, then you can encourage others to do it. Mm-hmm. I'm going to let it go back over to Kimberly.
No. I think you're absolutely right that the best form of allyship is definitely voting. Jamia, I'm curious, as you see in the media, in publishing, what does good allyship look like right now?
Ooh, I think right now it's been really interesting to see us having an opportunity as we look at everything that has been laid bare by COVID and all of the uprisings that have happened in social justice movements and the movement for Black Lives, to see industries like publishing really reckoning with the history and complicity with racialized capitalism, and seeing how we have a publishing landscape where only 1% of editors are Black and only 5% of publishing industry professionals are Black. And seeing now some shifts we've seen as it relates to this radicalized Blackout Tuesday bookseller list of people actively buying books by Black authors, and also by companies now having to accelerate their initiatives and being called for more accountability and engagement with people of color and BIPOC communities, but also in terms of all levels of the decision-making business within publishing companies. So I think that this is an exciting time, and it's sad that it took this long for this to happen. We're also seeing this on the other ends of the media as well, and broadcast TV, et cetera, but really seeing a time now where there are new voices being given platforms, as well as more public attention, more widespread public attention on longstanding media accountability movements. So I feel that for me, what's most important about right now is that we keep on our vigilance and we stay connected and keep raising our voices about the kind of media we want to see and the kinds of people we want to see leading the companies that give us our podcasts, give us our news, create our books, et cetera. And I say that at all levels of the industry as well. So one thing we talk about a lot with Feminist Press is, you can get typography that is feminist typography made by women, made by trans people. You can get book designers and illustrators who have been largely underrepresented in the field to be the people who are being hired to create the art that are producing the books. I want to get to a point where, as a publisher, I can actively choose between different Black printers that I could go to print all our books, right? And Black owned printers from Black women, right? That's my dream, that I would have many of those with which to choose from to give my business to. That is what I want to see in the world, and see that with, I want to be in a place where I'm not regularly getting emails about, how do I find a Black or Latinx agent? Because it's so hard for people to find representation that looks like them, because we have had systemic barriers and obstacles. And so I think right now is a really important time, and for younger people or people who are thinking about changing careers at this time in their life, because I think this is also a time of reinvention, right? For all of us, as everything's kind of being laid bare, we can all reimagine. Maybe thinking about your career differently. Maybe you thought that you could only intervene in one way, but maybe if you always wanted to write a book, or you always wanted to do art and illustrate, or you always wanted to go into publishing but didn't think there was an entree to do it in the past, now is the time. We need you. And we need us. I need us to be at that table, and want to be working with you.
Yeah, absolutely. Go ahead, Atima.
I was going to say, I think for me, in sort of the space of the work I do electorally, it's always been about ensuring that individuals have, and like Renee was saying earlier, about making sure that you know how to vote, where to vote, all of the steps to that, but ensuring that everybody else knows their rights in their community. It's also about holding our elected officials accountable. Years ago, I was elected, not too many years ago, but a few years ago, I was the president of the Young Democrats of America, and I was the first Black president elected in its 80+ year history, which has always been a surprising thing to me, and given how active Black people as a community have been in the Democratic Party for a very long time. But one of the things when I got elected was that I always believed, and the reason I got involved in politics, and I think this is very true for Generation Millennial and Generation Z, is that the parties overall, although I consider myself active in one party, have not been always the greatest representative on issues that we really, really care about. And so we kind of come into politics in the two-party system because we really care about certain issues. And that has been, for me, the reason I got involved. One of them was repro issues. And, there has always been sort of, I think, this mindset, certainly I think with older generations, about we have a nominee, we get to a certain point in elections, and, we get these people elected, and it was always sort of shunned, I think, traditionally, certainly when I first got involved several years ago, to, hold elected officials accountable on a lot of things, right? And to criticize them that they're not doing what they promised that they would do, or even evolving on a lot of issues. And I think the amazing thing that's happened, and there's been moments in our country generationally when it's happened. Certainly the civil rights movement was all about pushing. But I think for a while, things kind of, we got to a winning point with a lot of things. And so, other priorities were sort of moved forward. And so I think we've kind of come back to this moment of like, all right, things have gotten bad again, or they've always been bad for a lot of people. And we really need to be more strategic about how we push on the system. And the Hyde Amendment and where we are in this moment is a good example of that. I mean, like 5-7 years ago, if we were to talk about the Hyde Amendment being something that our party has taken a position on, the Democratic Party, for those who affiliate with it, taking a position on that it needs to be a thing of the past, I would have been surprised, right? But we're at this moment because activists like myself in the party, activists outside of the party, pushed really, really hard that it is just morally wrong to say that Roe is the law of the land. And the only way that you can access it, though, is if you have money to pay to get an abortion. Like the fact that you are poor, likely of color, means that you can't access it. And that's not morally correct. And so taking that stance on Hyde, taking that stance on criminal justice reform, Black Lives Matter is an aspirational statement. It's we want to get to a point in this country where Black lives truly matter in the same way that white lives do. And activists have pushed us to get to this moment. And so I consider the Breathe Act in that same sort of realm of Hyde, where people are like, well, this is kind of, it's going to be hard. We've had a system that's set up this way, but we have to try, we have to push, we have to do. And for me, that's why I do sort of the work that I do. It's because I believe that we need to be in those rooms and outside those rooms, trying to push strategically to get us toward progress.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. How we can continue to agitate both internally and externally to move the needle forward. And, thinking about all of the viewers and our members who are watching, and, everyone is at different points in their activism, but any thoughts around specific ways that our members can push the agenda forward for racial justice, reproductive justice, not just reproductive freedom. Any thoughts as to specific things that some of our members could do, or how they can approach it as they are, it's such an interesting space. I've had so many conversations with, women across socioeconomic barriers across the racial landscape, and everyone is at different places around their comfort in this moment, the agitation, and what we are all fighting for. And to do this work authentically, we have to continue to educate ourselves, and regardless of where you are or how comfortable you are with the issue, but you have to continue to educate and push and inform and do it all over again. So for, say, a member who is very activated in this moment of wanting to do something, they've never waded into the space really of racial justice. They've focused a lot on abortion access, reproductive freedom, but to step now into this space of reproductive justice and racial justice, what are your thoughts on where they can begin? Renee?
Oh, this could be a list, but let me try to contain myself here. Where can you begin?
Okay. We got time. Go for it.
We got time. I was going to say, first and foremost, thank you for recognizing that race matters. Okay, that's an important piece. I think the pandemic, this confluence of crises created a different environment in people, not only externally, but within people's heart, that there's a sense of humanity. And watching a man crushed, that can't breathe, with his knee in his throat over and over and over and over and over, created a different kind of empathy around the pain. And what they could then begin to see happening was a pattern that the same pain and angst that they were feeling by watching this man can't breathe, right, was happening on a consistent and daily basis to people who may not look like they do. And so it created a different opening for an awareness. And so now that we've got this opening about what is race and racial justice in particular, people have to learn and not be afraid to ask questions. People have to be curious and willing to learn. We do a lot of work in my consulting practice, and we've been doing a series on managing with a leadership, managing for racial justice and managing through racial justice. And one of the critical elements is people coming in touch with their own identities, right? And whiteness, I'll be blunt, whiteness. People need to be aware of what whiteness is and how it affects and impacts not only privilege, but everything else in society. Just as race is a factor for Black and brown people, it is a factor for white people as well. And being aware of it and being willing to have conversations and take actions, corrective actions, to begin to address the systemic wrongs that continue in order to maintain the privilege. And so being aware of it, that's an important piece. Asking questions, taking actions. If you ask and someone gives you an answer, ask them, how do I do that? Fine, ask them, but take the action. Don't ask and not do it. That's the worst thing. That just is marginalization. And so because we have this moment, I do believe people have a real opportunity if you understand this issue around race and racial justice. It's Jane Elliott who said in a video, it's called Being Black. And she said to a white audience, please stand up if you want to be treated the way in which we treat Black people in America. Nobody stood up. So she said it again, and she said it louder. Please stand up if you want to be treated the way in which we treat Black people in America. And nobody stood up. Well, that's because you know how we treat Black people. Okay, folks know that. Now do something different. And again, vote. Make sure you vote for folks who have attitudes that recognize we need to do something different. That the BREATHE Act is a critical function of America right now. So vote. Vote for those same people who are supporting the BREATHE Act are also those folks who are going to be supporting reproductive freedom, reproductive justice, and a woman's right to an abortion. A safe abortion. Abortion that they can access, that they all can access. And again, finances should not be a barrier, but again, in finances, race is a factor. So, Atima, I love the notion of Black Lives Matter is aspirational. It is indeed aspirational because right now, it frankly, we still don't matter too much.
Yeah.
To be honest with you, with the society, the systemic barriers are still there. So any organization that you're affiliated with, including NARAL, that has made a statement about support and commitment, hold them accountable. Hold leadership accountable. What does it mean in terms of budgets? Budgets in terms of the talent that you're going to put towards addressing it within your organization, within our communities, budget in terms of our treasures. What kind of resources are we putting behind it, right? And budget in terms of time, right? Make an investment in learning, make an investment in change, make an investment in judgment. When you address racial justice, you actually begin to move us closer to our reproductive freedom. All right, never ask me these questions, Kimberly.
No, I think that was great. And I think and to pull that thread a little further, also thinking about, as you were talking about budgets, because we know budgets are never about dollars and cents. They're about our priorities. And I think beyond budgets, just think about resources in terms of the space and the time that you occupy. And could you either make space for a voice of color to come in? Or are you uplifting the work or the values of a person of color or people of color in your work? How are you using, as someone, as a good friend of mine, kind of cobbled together a couple of great quotes of how are you spending your privilege as a white person on behalf of this moment? And I saw something recently where someone said, it's one thing for people to talk about wanting to have racial justice and true equality. But when it comes to having to give up something for themselves, that is when things get a little dicey. It's one thing to say that you want this, it's aspirational, but for that to happen, we have to have some realignment of power structures. We have to have some realignment of resources and conversations for that to actually manifest itself. And I'm also thinking about a lot of conversations that I'm having and kind of why I started the conversation today with all of you of just doing some level setting and creating some definitions, because there is so much that is not taught in school. There's so many conversations that are had within families of the Black and Brown community around these issues, racial justice, reproductive justice overall, but it's not necessarily part of it. It's not at all part of the national discourse or national education system. Jamia, off the top of your head, what are some resources that people can go to inform themselves so they can effectively go and do all the things that Renee was talking about and really be able to spend their privilege to advocate for the movement for Black lives or reproductive justice?
I love this question. So much has already been said that is so wise. I am thinking about what all of the white people in my family have asked me that they could do for me. So I'm going to recommend what I've asked for all of them to do, which is to buy Layla Saad's book, Me and White Supremacy, and then do all of the exercises in that book. And do not create emotional labor for the people of color in your life when doing the book. Get the book. Do the work, find other white folks who are doing the work to do the book with, or do it yourself, and do not process it, the people of color in your life. And the book actually says that. And what I've really been enjoying is, as I see my husband and other close beloveds in my family and other members of the family who are doing the book, I see them doing the work. And it's nice to not be engaged in it because they're following the rules, right? Or to see them kind of struggle with wanting me to help them through this process and realizing, actually, no, I need to interrupt this idea and this ideology I've been conditioned into that Jamia is supposed to nurture and manage me, right? And I need to do this work myself. And this work is not just for anyone else's liberation, it's also for my own. And so I've just seen in my own life how powerful that work is. And Layla is a sister friend. And I just think, buy her book, and then also support it and do the work in the book. And there's a new book she's working on for young people that's coming up soon as well. And I'm really excited. And if you have buying power for a company or a nonprofit, buy the book and have the entire team do Me and White Supremacy. One of the publishers who's published my work as an author is doing the work. They are all doing the book. And I can see that show up in how I'm engaged within the company. So I would just say that's one tactical call to action I'd like to ask for. Also, as it relates to these issues, I would say, buying the book of women in and BIPOC people in who have been doing this work for a long time. And, there's been a lot of different writing that has been done on the subjects of reproductive freedom and reproductive justice. And we need more books about reproductive justice. So I would recommend Radical Reproductive Justice, which is an anthology that we are proudly published at Feminist Press. And it has a lot of really insurgent conversation in that book as well. And I think really important text to have. We have another book called The Doulas. That is another really important birth justice book that is intersectional as well. And I would also recommend really thinking about not only buying that book for yourself, but really thinking about integrating it into programming for your organization. Starting a Radical RJ book club, for example, would be a really great idea. And I think just also understanding in that you're supporting the livelihood of people who've been doing this work and their thought leadership as well. So those would be things that I think could really have reverberations of change and just doing the work as it relates to doing the homework as well, and asking oneself the hard questions about how we can show up for this work differently. And then lastly, I'll say, open up your checkbooks. I know this is a hard time, but if you have an extra $5, $50, $500, $5,000 to give to organizations who are doing this work, and give specifically with and ask for this work to be, for your donation to be offsetting intersectional work within the organizations you care about. I think it's extremely important. I'm in the board of Groundswell Fund, and we fund radical reproductive justice work. And one of the reasons I'm proud to be a donor at Groundswell Fund is because I know that money is going to go and support insurgent intersectional work. And I think that it's extremely important. I feel like I'm investing in my own health and the health of my sisters and siblings and every time I give. So those would be the things that I think that would be the least of all that we can do. And from that, we can plant many seeds that will grow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that is, absolutely agree. Absolutely agree. Atima, what do you think from the activist and party structure? Like, what can our members do? And NARAL has amazing members and volunteers all across the country, and as they are volunteering and working with NARAL endorsed candidates or other candidates across the country, how can they carry this message forward?
Yeah, I think it's, the one thing I like a lot about NARAL is it's sort of like in the sweet spot of caring a lot about the reproductive rights policy, but also about trying to elect those people who are going to push it forward. And, one of the great ways, because of that, they have like a lot of amazing, great activists who, are involved in the local political parties, who are politically savvy and are also great organizers at the same time. And one of the things that I think I've started to notice, especially in my time doing C4 board work, is if you're a NARAL activist who's on a C4 board, you are part of the PAC process, look at your questionnaires. Are your questionnaires just focused around abortion access? Or are they also making sure they're focused around LGBT rights, criminal justice reform? There's a big movement in this country to encourage folks to consider not taking money from law enforcement associations that sometimes make it very hard to make change within law enforcement organizations. I think it was a Planned Parenthood affiliate in Arizona that actually encouraged their endorsed candidates to give that money back if they had received it. And many candidates did, actually. So in your endorsement processes for your affiliates, are you considering these things? Is your organizing work really actually focusing on the communities most affected by repro policies? Are you talking to communities of color? Are you engaging, training, mentoring activists of color, BIPOC, Black, Indigenous people of color, to not only be organizers in your community? Are you hiring them and encouraging them to be hired as staff at your affiliates? I was talking to one person that I know in the party structure, and they were talking to me about they're older, so they were talking about white privilege and trying to understand it a little bit more. And one of the things that they said was, I didn't really quite get it until I was talking to one of my other committee activists. And, this county, this area they have is very large, but it's also very diverse. And she, as a white woman, wanted to spend a lot of time telling one of the other Black leaders in the county how to organize the Black part of the county. She was like, okay, now I get it. Like, why am I to presume that I know how the work in your community should be done. Like that was her point of entry for understanding it. And that's the thing, right? We talk a lot about organizing communities of color. And I remember having a conversation with an enviro organization that very much was focused around that and having racial justice factors into their organizing. But yet many of the folks who were leading a lot of the campaign operational work did not look like the communities they were trying to organize. So it's just some of these key things that I'm thinking of. It's making sure that you're giving money and support and not centering yourself in the narrative of how to organize for racial justice. That happens a lot. And that's, I would say, goes into sort of like the friction between repro rights and RJ. It's, you see a lot, I've heard a lot of conversations around, I think some of the work that was happening in Portland and with the Wall of Moms, that was originally formed as an organization to be supportive of the Black Lives Matter movement. And now there's been a lot of talk from a lot of the organizers on the ground that it's shifted and now wants to move away and become their own sort of organizing force in a way that's not supportive, but is competitive in sort of the work that the Black Lives Matter activists are doing. So it's always looking to see how you can be of support in your unique way. If you don't like rallies, but you have some dollars to give, give some dollars. If you like rallies and you're going there, I had one friend who all the time she just made sure that whenever like the police or anybody else was blocking any of the Black organizers from protesting or giving them issues, she would put her white body literally in front of the police. We saw a lot of that over the month of June with a lot of protesters, but that's one physical way of making sure that Black and brown bodies are protected in protesting and rallying. So those are some of my thoughts of how I think NARAL activists and leaders can do some work in the community.
Yeah, I think that is, I think folks definitely will have some things that they can walk away from, that they could really do in this space. So one of the things that, we've talked, Atima, you just coined it so well, of that Black Lives Matter is an aspiration. And having full reproductive justice is an aspiration. What would each of you say, what would that actually look like? What would it feel like if we actually achieved reproductive justice in this country?
Ooh. Ooh. I mean, I think what it would, I think that's a beautiful question because of, visioning. I love to kind of like draw the vision as I would hope to see it, right? And, I just think it would be a place where we were all living in dignity and community interdependence and healing and transformation, that we would be in a space of joy versus struggle and lack. We would be in prosperity and abundance. I think, reproductive justice would mean that I wouldn't have been grappling for years with, and I'm saying this, as a Black woman, I wouldn't have been grappling with years about the decision about whether or not to have children or pay my student loans, or whether or not to plan to have children during a time where there would be more risk in my life because health insurance is linked to employment. And what would it look like if I could just focus on building a healthy, happy family without having my employment dictate that, or my skin and phenotype impact the likelihood of my mortality, right? Just to even think about the realities of what we have to think about now, and the fact that I can say that I've palpably been afraid to get pregnant in this country because I've seen the numbers and because I know how many disparities we face, is something that I think is abomination. I think that it's shameful. And so what I want is the opposite of that, that if I wanted to start a family and if I wanted to get happy, healthy medical care, that it wouldn't cross my mind to say, in order for me to have this, I can't have that. I want to be able to thrive instead of just fighting to survive. And I want those children that I would be bringing into this world to be able to go out into the world without fearing for their lives, to go get Skittles or to go for a run. And I think all of those things are wrapped up into what that liberation would look like.
Yeah, I think I spent a lot of time thinking about this, and I think the pandemic, you know, Black Lives Matter, like for Black people, I feel like especially, you know, we're a pandemic within a pandemic after sort of what we've seen happen to George Floyd, and then knowing that we're the individuals who are dying the most alongside Latino people, Latinx, because of COVID-19. And, you know, some of the things that I thought about, like Jamia said, as someone who's grappled and been visibly worried about getting pregnant as a Black woman, even with having resources and having good healthcare, and knowing that that does not matter and how I'm treated in the healthcare system. It's about the fact that if I had a child now, you know, as the discussion has been online and in media, there is just no universal childcare for people of all classes to actually be able to work and take care, keep a roof over their children's head in this country. Like we ask people to have children, and then we don't set up a structure in this country to ensure that there's actually well-funded, affordable childcare for everyone. It's me not having to argue with my insurance company about making sure that I have affordable access to my contraception. There are like a few states in this country that if you are on the pill, you can get the 12-month supply right away and not have them manage it and give it to you 3 months at a time. And then actually to having to argue, no, my state is one of those states, I need it, not having to battle that. Like I'm just like, I get my prescription, the doctor hands it over, there are no arguments, there are no questions, or the pharmacy. It's having children who go to school who I don't have to worry are not going to be suspended because they mouthed off or were being kids. And they took it differently. The school system took it differently because my child is Black. These are things that I've thought about. These are things that I realize in a world where reproductive justice is realized would not be things that I would have to worry about.
Mm-hmm. Renee, dreams, aspirations?
That my well-being wasn't so intrinsically linked to my reproductive being. That overall, you know, I think about things like being able to get care regardless of what the care is, not based on my insurance, but I could get care, health care, and recognition that this is health care for my being and the wellness of myself and the family that I choose, when I choose, and how I choose. I think about aspirationally what, you know, so oftentimes we do this exercise, kind of the smell of the place. What would it smell like? What would this smell like? And it would smell like a breath of fresh, clean, non-toxic air whenever I needed it, which is all the time. And so that was readily accessible, not just to me, but to everyone, that we were no longer having to have these conversations because we now have moved on to, you know, what does artificial intelligence mean or something different? But then we're not dealing with the basics and the basis of who we are as humans. You know, I routinely talk about unconditional positive regard, that we value each other for the humanity that we bring to bear, and that our government values us for the government we need to bear, because the government is made up of people like us with shared values. So that to me is what a reproductive freedom, reproductive justice would look like, feel like, smell like. It would smell fresh and filling.
I love that. I love that. Yes, I echo all that you have said, all three of you have said. And I think one of the ways that we can really champion this effort and be able to move things forward is if we uplift more women of color, and particularly Black women, to decision-making tables. And that has been my work at Higher Heights, electing Black women and creating pathways for Black women to climb their leadership ladder, whether it is going from, being somewhat aware of politics and wanting to register to vote, and then becoming an activist, going from being an activist to a candidate, and really supporting the women that are in elected office so that they can truly lead. Because it's one thing to get there, and it is another to navigate those structures in those legislative bodies or in those executive offices to really be able to move forward an agenda that really pushes the envelope on reproductive justice and racial justice. So Higher Heights for America has partnered with NARAL on several candidates this cycle. We've been partners for a long time to really amplify and uplift and support Black women who are on the ballot right now. We have record numbers. We said this in 2018. We had record numbers running for Congress, and that number has been completely smashed in 2020. And we are really excited about the opportunities that exist to really expand Black women's elected leadership in Congress and in statewide executive office across this country, and really show and amplify the possibilities that exist and the changes that can be made. And you think about people like Lauren Underwood and Lucy McBath and Ayanna Pressley and what they have been able to do in the short 2 years, and Jahana Hayes, and that what they have been able to do in that time that they have been in Congress, and how much more they would be able to do if we're able to grow the number of Black women from 25, let's get it to 45, and continue to do that. And with partnerships with NARAL and others, and all of you, we can make sure that these women have the resources, they have the amplification, they have the support, the moral support, as well as the financial support to get it done. And that is, for me, a big piece of reproductive justice, is saying we have people who are leading in this space, so that when appropriations committee, the finance committee, all of these things in Congress, and we have governors and mayors who are setting the agenda and the priorities. When we have people who represent a wide variety of life experiences at those decision-making tables, we will really have an opportunity to achieve and to have that fresh breath that Renee talked about, and be able to say, we're going to create this space because this is the space that the people of this country need. So that, for me, is what reproductive justice really looks like. It's the experience, and it's also a change in the leadership.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. So I think we have a call to action coming from one of the lead organizers at NARAL. Travis, are you on the line?
I am. Thank you so much. I learned a ton. I am so glad that I've had a chance to interact with every single one of those amazing panelists you just heard from before. And I look forward to continuing to work with you all, hopefully in a deeper way, personally, but also in an NARAL capacity. Okay, I have 2 minutes right now. Here's what we're gonna do. There is a poll right now. Some of the things that were mentioned for you to take action that our panelists recommended, let us know. What is the one you're gonna prioritize the most to take action? There were books recommended to buy, organizations that support electing more African-American women to office that you can donate to. Answer that poll. The one thing I want to say is come back here to this main stage in 10 minutes, because we will have an amazing closing plenary. During that 10-minute break, I want each and every one of you to go to the expo booth, not yet, hear me out, and become a community co-sponsor of the Breathe Act. The Breathe Act is a modern-day civil rights bill announced by the Movement for Black Lives in honor of people murdered by police and state-sanctioned violence. The Breathe Act is not the only answer. Racism, oppression is a systemic system, but we want to make sure we're centering this call to action right now from the Movement to Black Lives as federal legislation. It's not introduced yet, so you could call your elected officials if you want, but because it's not introduced yet, we want you to follow what the Movement for Black Lives has asked us to ask you, which is to sign up as a community co-sponsor. Be back here at 5:11 p.m. Eastern Time, 2 p.m. Pacific Time, and everything in between. 2:10 p.m. Pacific Time and everything in between. Thank you all. Again, there is a link to the expo booth, specifically what booth you can go to take action in support of the Breathe Act. Do that right now. See you all in 10 minutes.